How to block your mind of create fake fears, and how to break that loop. There is a moment in your life when you begin to notice that most of the things you fear never actually happen. Yet your body reacts as if the danger were real. Your heart races, your chest tightens. Your mind builds entire scenarios that feel true, even though they are nothing more than projections of a brain trying to protect you from something that isn't even there. This is the silent trap the modern mind falls into. The ability to create threats that have no substance, but carry enough emotional weight to shape your decisions, your relationships, and your behavior. You start avoiding conversations, opportunities, and risks, not because something bad is happening, but because your brain decided to create its own version of danger and convinced you to believe it. If Descartes were beside you right now, he would say that the mind has an extraordinary ability to fabricate illusions, and that the greatest mistake is accepting those illusions as truth. The problem is not the fear itself, but the way you interpret it. When a thought appears, your brain doesn't ask, "Is this real?" It asks, "How do I protect you?" And in that split second, the ancient survival systems you carry from a world long gone take control. Your amygdala fires as if a predator were standing in front of you, even when all that happened was a message left on read, a strange tone of voice, or a memory from years ago resurfacing without your permission. Your biology reacts to a story your mind invented, and this biological reaction makes the story feel even more real. Jordan Peterson often says that confronting the chaos inside you is the only way to prevent it from controlling your life. Yet most people never confront it. They freeze, they run, they avoid. And every time you avoid, your brain rewards you with a small hit of relief that feels like safety, teaching your nervous system that the fear was real even when it wasn't. This is how the loop starts, how the loop grows, and how the loop keeps you trapped. But the truth is simple. Once you understand how these fake fears are created, you begin to see that your mind is not attacking you. It is misinterpreting information. Andrew Huberman explains that the brain is a prediction machine. It constantly anticipates what might happen next based on past experiences and emotional states. When stress or uncertainty rise, the prediction system becomes overactive, scanning for danger in every detail, every silence, every doubt, every possibility. The mind that was designed to keep you alive ends up keeping you scared. And if you don't learn how to interrupt this mechanism, your brain will continue producing fake fears every single day, automatically. This video is not just a guide to understand fear. It is an invitation to reclaim your inner authority, to separate what is real from what your brain imagines, and to build a mindset capable of dismantling illusions before they take control. By the end of this journey, you will understand how to block your mind from creating fake fears and how to break the loop that has been shaping your reactions, your confidence, and your emotional stability. The micro-trigger that sets everything off. Fake fears almost never begin with something dramatic. They don't start with a crisis or a catastrophe. They start with something small, subtle, almost invisible. A micro-trigger. A moment so quick and ordinary that you barely notice it, yet your brain reacts to it as if you had stepped into danger. This is one of the most overlooked realities of fear creation. The mind doesn't need a real threat to activate its alarm system. It only needs a signal that feels familiar to something that once hurt you. A micro-trigger can be a tone of voice that reminds you of a past argument. It can be an unanswered message that echoes a moment when you felt abandoned. It can be a sudden silence in a conversation, the uncertainty of waiting for a result, or a strange expression on someone's face that you interpret as rejection. It can even come from inside you, a slight physical tension, a random memory, or a thought that appears without context. These subtle moments are enough to awaken the part of your brain that constantly scans for danger, always ready to protect you from threats that no longer exist. The mind doesn't distinguish between the present and the past. It only compares patterns. When something feels similar to a previous emotional wound, your brain reacts as if history were repeating itself. Andrew Huberman often explains how the brain is constantly matching current experiences with memory-based predictions. If a moment carries the same emotional tone as a painful event from your past, the brain doesn't wait for evidence. It assumes risk. It prepares for impact. It activates fear. This is why certain situations feel disproportionately intense. You're not reacting to what is happening now, but to what your nervous system learned years ago. Joe Dispenza teaches that the body becomes conditioned to expect the same emotional states repeatedly, and this conditioning turns into an automatic loop. A micro-trigger lights the spark, and your physiology takes over. Your chest tightens, your breathing accelerates, your thoughts shift toward worst-case scenarios. Your imagination begins building possibilities that feel like facts. And suddenly, without realizing it, you are emotionally reacting to something that never happened. Jordan Peterson often describes this as the chaos that grows in the dark corners of the mind. When something small disturbs your internal balance, the mind fills the unknown with fear. Ambiguity becomes danger. Silence becomes rejection. Uncertainty becomes failure. The micro-trigger opens the door, and your imagination rushes in to construct catastrophic interpretations. All of this happens before you even have the chance to think clearly. The painful part is that these micro-triggers are often invisible until you learn to recognize them. You only notice the emotional storm, not the moment that started it. But when you learn to identify this micro-moment, everything changes. You stop being controlled by automatic reactions. You begin to understand the exact second when fear enters your mind. And once you see it, you can interrupt it. You can question it. You can break the loop before it takes control. This awareness becomes the first step toward freedom. You can't stop the brain from noticing micro-triggers, but you can stop the cascade that follows. When you catch the spark before it becomes a fire, you reclaim the authority your fear once held. Descartes' trap. When your mind creates a reality that doesn't exist. There is a moment when fear stops being a reaction and becomes a narrative. It's the moment when your mind stops responding to the world and begins inventing a version of it. This is what René Descartes warned about centuries ago. The mind has the power to construct illusions that feel indistinguishable from truth. When you are caught in a loop of fear, you're not fighting reality. You're fighting a story your own mind created, and the story feels so vivid, so detailed, so emotionally charged that you don't question it. You accept it as fact. Descartes believed that doubt could be a tool for clarity. Today, modern psychology echoes the same principle. When your brain enters a fear-driven state, clarity disappears, reasoning collapses, and your perception becomes distorted. You start hearing danger in silence. You start interpreting uncertainty as failure. You imagine outcomes that have no evidence, but because your body reacts with tension and adrenaline, the fear feels justified. This is the trap. The physiological response becomes proof that the imagined threat must be real. Cognitive psychology explains this as a prediction error. Your brain tries to fill gaps in information by using memories, emotions, and assumptions. If the emotional tone feels threatening, the brain leans toward negative predictions. Andrew Huberman calls this anticipatory anxiety, the moment when the nervous system prepares for a threat that doesn't actually exist. It's an ancient reflex acting inside a modern mind. Your biology doesn't understand text messages, emotional distance, financial stress, or relationship uncertainty. It only understands patterns, discomfort, and the need to survive. This is why so much of what you fear is not happening outside. It's happening inside. Your mind constructs an illusion, and your body confirms it. Your imagination becomes the architect of your anxiety. Joe Dispenza describes this perfectly. When you repeatedly think the same fearful thoughts, your brain and body become addicted to that emotional state. Fear becomes a habit rather than a reaction. You begin to expect danger even in calm moments, reinforcing the illusion again and again. Jordan Peterson often says that people who avoid confronting their fears become trapped in a landscape shaped by the imagination instead of reality. The more you avoid verifying whether the fear is true, the more powerful the illusion becomes. You stop living in the world as it is and start living in the world your fear designed. And because the mind is capable of extraordinary complexity, these illusions can feel sharper, darker, and more convincing than anything you've experienced in the real world. But once you recognize the trap, something changes. The illusion loses its grip. You understand that the mind is not a mirror, it is a storyteller. And storytellers don't always tell the truth. When you step back and examine the fear with awareness, you discover that the narrative collapses. You start asking the questions Descartes would ask. How do I know this is real? What evidence do I have? What part of this fear comes from me rather than the world? That moment of clarity is the beginning of liberation. You stop being controlled by a reality your mind invented, and you return to the world as it is, simpler, quieter, and far less dangerous than your imagination suggested. The neurotransmitter war inside your brain. The moment fear begins, something deeper than thought happens inside you. A chemical storm, a silent war between neurotransmitters that shapes how you interpret the world. Fear is not just psychological, it is biological. And if you don't understand what is happening inside your own body, you may end up believing that these reactions are truths instead of chemical signals. This is where neuroscience becomes essential, because it reveals that fake fears are often the result of imbalances in the very substances that regulate your emotions, your focus, and your sense of safety. Serotonin is one of the first players in this war. When serotonin is low, your perception becomes biased toward danger. Neutral situations look threatening, small problems feel overwhelming, and uncertainty becomes intolerable. Your brain loses its ability to stabilize your emotional landscape. Andrew Huberman often reminds us that serotonin is linked to well-being, confidence, and internal safety. When this system weakens, the mind becomes vulnerable to exaggeration, distortion, and catastrophizing. A minor stressor suddenly becomes a perceived threat. Cortisol, the stress hormone, fuels this distortion even further. When cortisol rises, your body enters a state of heightened alertness. Your muscles tense. Your breathing changes. Your thoughts speed up. Your mind begins scanning for threats, even in perfectly safe environments. Cortisol is designed for short-term survival, not long-term living. But in a modern world filled with constant uncertainty, notifications, and emotional pressure, cortisol can remain elevated for days or even weeks. This chronic stress creates a filter in your mind that amplifies fear and diminishes reason. Dopamine also plays a powerful, often misunderstood role. It doesn't only create pleasure, it sharpens your focus. When the brain detects something that feels emotionally charged, dopamine locks your attention onto it. If the emotion is fear, dopamine magnifies it. Your mind becomes glued to the possibility of danger. A single fearful thought becomes a loop, a mental echo that repeats itself because dopamine gives it importance. Jordan Peterson often talks about how focusing on the wrong things strengthens them. And this is exactly what happens. Your brain reinforces the very fear it wants to escape. Meanwhile, endorphins and oxytocin, chemicals that create feelings of safety, connection, and calm, become suppressed when fear rises. The emotional balance shifts. You feel less supported, less grounded, less connected to yourself and others. The mind interprets this imbalance as confirmation. Something is wrong. You are not safe. Joe Dispenza explains how these emotional states become conditioned responses. Your nervous system learns to expect fear, and the neurotransmitter pattern becomes habitual. This chemical war creates a powerful illusion. You believe you're afraid because something bad is happening, but in reality, something is happening because you are afraid. The biology comes first, the interpretation comes second. And when the body enters this fear chemistry, the mind follows its lead, shaping thoughts that match the internal state. The danger doesn't exist outside. It exists in the imbalance between the systems meant to protect you. Understanding this changes the conversation entirely. It shows you that fear often has no meaning at all. It is chemistry, not prophecy. It is a signal, not a sentence. When you see the biological mechanics behind the emotion, you stop treating fear as truth and start recognizing it as a state that can be shifted, regulated, and rewired. The internal saboteur. How the brain uses your past against you. There is a part of your mind that reacts faster than you think, faster than logic, faster than awareness. It is the part of you shaped by past experiences, especially the painful ones. This is the internal saboteur, not because it wants to harm you, but because it believes it is protecting you. The brain is a pattern recognition machine. When something in the present feels emotionally similar to something that once hurt you, the brain doesn't pause to evaluate. It assumes danger and responds automatically. You are not reacting to the moment. You are reacting to a memory disguised as the moment. This is one of the core principles of cognitive behavioral therapy. The brain rarely asks, "Is this true?" Instead, it asks, "Have I felt this before?" If the answer is yes, your nervous system triggers the same emotional response you had in the past. A tone of disappointment may remind you of rejection. A moment of silence might feel like abandonment. Someone's frustration may echo a childhood wound. Without realizing it, your brain pulls archived emotional files and plays them over your current experiences, distorting your perception. You're reliving an old story without knowing it. Andrew Huberman explains that emotional memories are stored with sensory detail. Your nervous system remembers not only what happened, but how it felt. A similar sensation, even if slight, can activate the entire defensive network. The present becomes a mirror of your past, even when the situations have nothing in common. Your mind becomes a storyteller that repeats old chapters in new contexts, convincing you that past pain is returning even when nothing dangerous is happening. Joe Dispenza describes this as living by memory instead of living by vision. The body becomes addicted to familiar emotional states, even if those states are destructive. The nervous system prefers the discomfort it recognizes over the safety it doesn't trust yet. This is why certain fears feel so immediate, so visceral, so irrational. Your reaction is not to the current event, but to an emotional pattern your brain has rehearsed for years. Your internal saboteur is trying to shield you, but it does so by limiting you, shrinking you, and making you react to ghosts. Jordan Peterson often says that what we refuse to confront becomes larger in the shadows. When unresolved experiences remain unexamined, they influence your present without your consent. You see threats where there are none. You interpret simple situations with the emotional weight of past trauma. You avoid opportunities because they resemble old failures. You guard yourself so tightly that you stop living fully, believing the saboteur's warnings even when they have no basis in reality. But when you begin to recognize this mechanism, everything shifts. You realize that these reactions are not signs of current danger, but echoes of previous pain. You learn to ask a different question. Is this coming from now or from before? That simple awareness breaks the spell. You start separating the present moment from your past conditioning. You regain control over reactions that once felt automatic. You begin to see that your internal saboteur isn't powerful. It's outdated. It operates on fears that no longer match the life you're living. This clarity becomes a turning point. You understand that your past doesn't have the authority to shape your perception anymore. You can update the pattern. You can rewire the emotional reflex. You can choose a different response. And every time you do, the internal saboteur weakens, giving you one more inch of freedom over a mind that once held you captive. The silent feedback loop. Why fear repeats even when you know it's fake. There is a moment when you clearly recognize that your fear has no logic, yet the emotion refuses to disappear. You tell yourself there is no danger, but your body won't calm down. This is one of the most frustrating experiences for anyone who struggles with anxiety or intrusive thinking. You understand the fear is irrational, but awareness alone doesn't stop the loop. And here lies one of the most misunderstood truths of emotional life. Fear continues because the brain is rewarding it. Every time you avoid something that scares you, your brain experiences a spike of relief. That relief feels good. It feels protective. It feels safe. And underneath that sensation, is a powerful chemical reward, dopamine. This is the mechanism Andrew Huberman often explains. The nervous system reinforces behaviors that reduce discomfort. When you avoid a difficult conversation, postpone a decision, or escape a situation that makes you anxious, your brain interprets that relief as a successful strategy and rewards you for it. The reward becomes a signal. Do this again next time. And the fear becomes stronger. This is the silent feedback loop. A cycle that looks like this. Fear, avoidance, relief, reward. Each time the cycle repeats, the fear pattern becomes more deeply wired into your brain. Joe Dispenza describes this perfectly. Emotional reactions become memorized. The body becomes conditioned to expect fear, and the mind follows the body, reinforcing the same emotional state. Even if you logically know that the fear is fake, the pattern operates beneath consciousness. Your biology is dictating your behavior before your thoughts even catch up. Jordan Peterson often emphasizes that avoiding what frightens you does not make you safer. It makes the world look more dangerous. When you avoid an uncomfortable situation, you shrink the map of your life. You teach your nervous system that you can't handle the very things that would actually strengthen you. The relief you feel becomes the trap. The more relief you seek, the smaller your level of confidence becomes, and the more your mind interprets ordinary life as threatening. This loop also taps into your past. The nervous system remembers avoidance patterns from years ago. If as a child you avoided conflict to feel safe, your adult brain continues to use the same strategy, even when you're no longer in the same environment. Avoidance becomes automatic. Fear becomes habitual, not situational. And your mind becomes skilled at inventing new reasons to justify the avoidance. The painful part is that this loop can continue even when you clearly recognize the pattern. Awareness alone isn't enough to break it because the loop is not driven by logic. It's driven by reward. The mind says, "There's nothing to fear," but the body remembers how good avoidance felt, and it pushes you back into the same reaction. But there is good news. Once you understand how the loop works, you stop personalizing the fear. You stop thinking something is wrong with you. You realize your nervous system is following a predictable algorithm, a programmed response that can be rewired. When you break one link in the cycle, fear, avoidance, relief, reward, the entire pattern begins to collapse. This understanding becomes a turning point. You no longer fight the fear as if it were a mystery. You see the mechanics behind it. You understand the loop is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of conditioning. And conditioning can be undone. The 3-second neural interception. How to break the loop before it takes over. There is a very specific moment, so fast you almost miss it, when fear shifts from a thought into a physical reaction. It's the instant when the body takes control from the mind, when emotion becomes sensation, and sensation becomes panic. If you can intercept this moment, even by a few seconds, you can break the entire fear loop before it gains momentum. Neuroscience calls this pattern interruption, and it is one of the most effective tools for retraining the brain. The key is speed. You must intervene before the amygdala fully hijacks your nervous system. Andrew Huberman often explains that the amygdala reacts first, and the prefrontal cortex, the rational part of your brain, responds second. That tiny delay is why fear feels so automatic. Your thinking mind arrives late to the scene, trying to make sense of a reaction already underway. But if you can create even a 3-second pause between the trigger and the full emotional response, you give your prefrontal cortex the chance to step back into the conversation. Those 3 seconds become your doorway to freedom. This interception begins with naming the fear, not analyzing it, not rationalizing it, simply naming it. When you say to yourself, "My brain is predicting danger," or "This is a false alarm," you activate neural circuits that pull the prefrontal cortex online. It's a subtle shift, but it moves the reaction from the emotional brain to the thinking brain. Jordan Peterson often emphasizes that naming a fear reduces its power because the unnamed is always more frightening than the known. Giving the fear a name gives you authority over it. The second step is to take one slow breath, no more than 3 seconds. Breath controls the nervous system. When the inhale is calm and deliberate, it sends a direct signal to the brainstem that the environment is not dangerous. Even one conscious breath disrupts the momentum of panic. Huberman explains that breath is the only tool that instantly shifts the balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. You are using physiology to interrupt physiology. The final step is to shift your attention from the imagined threat to the physical sensations in your body. Notice your hands. Notice your feet. Notice the tension in your chest or the temperature of the room. This grounds your awareness in the present moment, pulling your mind out of the imagined future your fear was constructing. Joe Dispenza teaches that when attention moves from the mind's narrative to the body's sensations, the emotional energy behind the narrative weakens. The thought loses its grip because the body is no longer amplifying it. This entire process takes less than 10 seconds, but its impact is enormous. You interrupt the panic before your body locks into the fear state. You stop the dopamine reinforcement of avoidance. You calm the amygdala before it spirals into overactivation. And you give your rational mind a chance to evaluate the situation clearly instead of reacting blindly. What makes this technique so powerful is that it's simple enough to use anywhere. In a conversation, before sleep, in the middle of an anxious thought, while waiting for a message. Anytime your mind starts creating stories that your body begins to believe. Each interception rewires your brain's default response to fear. Each interruption weakens the old pattern. Each moment of clarity builds a new neural pathway that teaches your brain a new truth. Not every discomfort is danger. This is where the shift begins. Fear no longer grows into a narrative. It becomes a moment. A moment you can intercept. A moment you can control. The Stoic counterattack, when reality destroys the imagination's lies. There comes a point when the only way to weaken fear is to confront it with reality. Not with reassurance, not with positive thinking, but with evidence. Marcus Aurelius and Seneca understood something profound. Most of human suffering comes not from events themselves, but from the stories we tell ourselves about those events. The Stoics believed that the mind exaggerates, distorts, and dramatizes, and that clarity comes from examining what is actually happening rather than what we imagine could happen. When you place fear next to facts, fear collapses. This is the Stoic counterattack. It begins with one simple question. Where is the evidence? Not the emotion, not the prediction, not the memory. Evidence. When Jordan Peterson speaks about confronting chaos, he often insists that the first step is to shine light on it. And when you look directly at the fear without flinching, you often discover that there is nothing solid behind it. The threat was an assumption. The danger was a projection. The narrative was a construction of your own imagination. Fear thrives in ambiguity. When you don't know what's happening, your mind fills the gaps with worst-case scenarios. But when you examine the situation with precision, the imagined catastrophe loses its strength. For example, you fear someone is angry with you. What is the evidence? You fear a message means rejection. What is the evidence? You fear a silence means abandonment. What is the evidence? Every time you answer honestly without bending reality to match your emotion, the fear weakens. Your brain cannot maintain a fear that reality does not support. Andrew Huberman explains that attention determines emotional intensity. When you focus on what is imagined, fear increases. When you focus on what is real, fear decreases because reality provides boundaries. It gives structure. It gives limits. The nervous system calms when the unknown becomes known. Your physiology shifts from projection to presence. This grounding interrupts the dopamine-driven spiral of fear and restores your ability to think clearly. Joe Dispenza often says that you must separate the emotion from the event. When you do this, you begin to see the situation for what it is, not what your conditioned past tells you it might be. the emotional charge begins to dissolve. You stop reinforcing the fear loop and start weakening the neural pathways that keep you stuck. This is how you teach the brain that not every discomfort is danger, and not every uncertainty is a threat. The Stoic counterattack is not about pretending everything is fine. It's about seeing things as they are. It's about refusing to let imagination define reality. It is a disciplined return to truth. And with each return, the mind becomes less reactive and more grounded. You become the observer rather than the victim of your own thoughts. This is where resilience begins. When you confront the fear with evidence, the illusion dissolves. When you return to reality, the chaos shrinks. And when you stop believing your imagination blindly, you reclaim the authority your fear once stole from you. In that moment, you realize that the mind is powerful, but so are you. The neuroplasticity ritual, teaching your brain a new way to respond. Every time you interrupt fear, question it, or confront it with evidence, you are doing more than calming yourself down. You are rewiring your brain. Neuroplasticity is the ability of your nervous system to change its structure and function based on experience. Andrew Huberman often emphasizes that repetition is what tells the brain which patterns to strengthen and which to dissolve. The more often you respond to fear with clarity instead of avoidance, the more your brain learns that the old survival pattern is no longer necessary. You are teaching your mind to stop reacting automatically and start responding intentionally. Fear becomes a loop because the brain memorizes it. But the brain also memorizes your interruptions. Every deliberate action you take during a moment of anxiety sends a new signal. This situation is not dangerous. Over time, this message becomes a new neural pathway, a new default response. Joe Dispenza explains that when you repeatedly stay conscious in moments where you used to react unconsciously, the old emotional patterns begin to break apart. The body stops triggering the same chemical storms. The mind stops replaying the same narratives. You are not only reducing fear, you are rebuilding the neurological foundation of your emotional life. The neuroplasticity ritual begins with small exposures. You do not need to face the biggest fears first. You begin with micro moments, answering the message you've been avoiding, making the small decision you've postponed, speaking the truth you've been suppressing. Each small exposure teaches your brain that you can handle discomfort. Each small step builds confidence. Jordan Peterson often says that courage is built in increments, not in grand gestures. When you face the small things, you train yourself for the larger ones. Reframing your thoughts becomes another essential part of this ritual, not by pretending everything is positive, but by interpreting events through accuracy instead of fear. Instead of saying, "This will go wrong," you say, "I don't know yet." Instead of saying, "They must be upset," you say, "There is no evidence." Instead of saying, "I can't handle this," you say, "I've handled similar things before." These small reframes reshape the meaning your brain attaches to discomfort. Meaning determines emotion. Change the meaning, and the emotion follows. Behavioral micro-actions complete the ritual. The brain learns through action, not intention. If you want to break the fear loop, you must act differently while the fear is present. You must move, speak, or decide in ways that contradict the fear's prediction. When your actions oppose the fear, your nervous system realizes the threat was imaginary. The amygdala weakens. The prefrontal cortex strengthens. The old neural pathway loses power because you did not obey it. The key to this entire process is consistency. Neuroplasticity doesn't happen from understanding alone. It happens from repetition. The more times you break the loop, the faster the old pattern erodes. The more often you act from clarity instead of fear, the more natural clarity becomes. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. What once triggered panic becomes neutral. You begin to notice that your mind is no longer ruled by old reflexes, but guided by your conscious choices. This is how you retrain the brain. Not by eliminating fear, but by teaching your nervous system that fear does not mean danger. Over time, you replace the reactive mind with a resilient one. You stop surviving your inner world and you begin shaping it. The reconnection. Fear is a signal, not a problem. There is a transformative moment in every person's life when fear stops being an enemy and becomes information. This shift changes everything. Instead of interpreting fear as a warning that something terrible is about to happen, you begin to see it as a signal pointing toward an area of your life that needs attention, healing, or clarity. Fear becomes a messenger instead of a threat. And when you stop fighting the messenger, the message finally becomes clear. One of the greatest distortions of modern life is the belief that fear always means danger. But ancient philosophy and modern neuroscience agree on something surprising. Fear often means growth. Marcus Aurelius believed that discomfort reveals the places where truth is hiding. Jordan Peterson says that within the things you are avoiding lies the very path that could strengthen you. And Andrew Huberman explains that fear states activate neural circuits linked to learning and adaptation. Your brain is not punishing you with fear. It is preparing you to evolve. When you interpret fear as a problem, you react with avoidance. When you interpret fear as a signal, you respond with curiosity. This shift is subtle but powerful. Instead of asking, "How do I get rid of this feeling?" you begin asking, "What is this feeling trying to show me?" The moment you approach fear with curiosity, your physiology changes, your nervous system calms, your breath becomes steadier, your thoughts become clearer. Curiosity engages the prefrontal cortex, allowing you to step out of the emotional fog and into conscious reasoning. Often, fear points to an unresolved part of your past, a wound that was never addressed, a pattern you've been repeating, a belief that needs to be questioned. Other times, fear signals a part of your potential that you have not yet learned to trust. The conversation you fear may be the one that sets you free. The decision you fear may be the one that leads you to a new chapter. The uncertainty you fear may be the place where your next level of strength is waiting. Joe Dispenza teaches that the body holds emotional memories until you consciously release them. Fear becomes the spotlight revealing where those memories are stored. Each time fear arises, it shows you exactly where your emotional work needs to happen. Not everywhere, not in every direction, in that specific place, at that specific moment. Fear is precise. And when you learn to listen instead of react, you begin to understand the message. Reconnection also means rebuilding trust with yourself. Fear often appears strongest when you doubt your capacity. This is why facing fear strengthens your identity. Each time you confront the moment instead of escaping it, you send a message to your nervous system. I can handle this. Over time, this becomes the foundation of unshakable confidence. You're no longer hoping the world becomes easier. You are becoming stronger within it. Fear is not your enemy. It is your compass. It shows you the direction where growth, healing, truth, and transformation reside. When you stop treating fear as a problem to eliminate and start treating it as a teacher to understand, your entire relationship with your inner world changes. You stop running, you start listening, you start evolving. In this reconnection, fear loses its power. It becomes guidance, not paralysis. And you begin to walk through life with clarity rather than avoidance. The final shift. The new you who no longer belongs to that loop. There is a moment when the old fear loses its familiar weight, and you notice something you haven't felt in years. Space inside your mind. Not silence, not numbness, but space. Room to think, room to breathe, room to choose. This is the moment when you realize that you're no longer reacting from the automatic patterns that once controlled you. You're no longer the person who believed every anxious thought. You're no longer the person who mistook discomfort for danger. You've crossed a threshold, and you can feel it. The loop that once dictated your reactions no longer defines you. You begin to understand that the real transformation didn't happen when the fear disappeared. It happened when you stopped believing in the illusion it created. Andrew Huberman often says that awareness opens the door to rewiring. The simple act of recognizing the pattern allowed you to interrupt it, weaken it, and replace it. Each moment you intercepted the fear. Each moment you questioned the lie. Each moment you grounded yourself in reality. You were reshaping the architecture of your brain. You were building a mind that responds instead of reacts. Jordan Peterson talks about the importance of confronting chaos so that order can emerge. You confronted your internal chaos. You walked into the unknown of your own emotions and refused to let the darkest predictions define you. This act of courage, small at first, then larger, began to rewrite your identity. You stopped living as the person fear taught you to be and started becoming the person you were meant to be. Someone capable, grounded, observant, and self-directed. Joe Dispenza explains that the body becomes conditioned to old emotional states, but it can also become conditioned to new ones. As you broke the loop, you trained your body to expect clarity instead of panic, presence instead of projection, truth instead of imagination. You taught your nervous system a new pattern. Discomfort does not equal danger. Uncertainty does not equal catastrophe. Silence does not equal rejection. You taught your body to trust you again. And now, something deeper becomes clear. You are no longer a passive passenger in your inner world. You have authority over your mind, not because fear vanished, but because you learned to navigate it. You no longer belong to the old loop, because the loop no longer has anything to attach itself to. The identity that kept it alive has faded. You have outgrown it. This new version of you doesn't avoid difficult conversations. You approach them. You don't run from uncertainty. You examine it. You don't interpret silence as danger. You interpret it as space. You don't allow your imagination to dictate your reality. You use your awareness to define it. You move through life with a mind that is sharper, calmer, and more grounded than before. And the most important realization of all emerges quietly. Fear was never trying to destroy you. It was pointing toward the parts of you that needed strength. You listened, you learned, you transformed. You broke a cycle that once felt unbreakable. You are not the person who entered this video. You carry tools, clarity, and a new relationship with your inner world. The loop no longer owns you. You walk forward with a mind that sees truth, a nervous system that trusts you, and a life ready to expand because you are no longer held back by illusions. The mind that walks forward. There comes a final moment in every transformation when you look back and realize the shift wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't come with fireworks or a sudden revelation. It emerged slowly, through each moment you refused to run, through every breath you took in the middle of uncertainty, through every quiet decision to stay present instead of surrendering to the imagination's chaos. That accumulation of small victories becomes something unshakable. It becomes the foundation of the new mind you're carrying now. You begin to realize that strength was never the absence of fear. Strength was the ability to see fear clearly, without letting it design your reality. Andrew Huberman reminds us that the brain changes with the behaviors we repeat. And you have repeated awareness, clarity, questioning, grounding, naming, breathing, and choosing. These weren't just techniques, they were acts of self-respect. Each interruption of the old pattern was a declaration. I will not be ruled by illusions. Neuroplasticity didn't just reshape your circuits. It reshaped your sense of self. Jordan Peterson often says that the things you fear contain the treasures you seek. The loop you once felt trapped inside was never a prison. It was a teacher. It showed you where you were conditioned, where you were wounded, where you needed to grow. Each false alarm you learned to examine made you more resilient. Each imagined catastrophe you challenged made you more grounded. And every time you stepped toward truth instead of avoidance, you broke another thread of the web that once held you down. Joe Dispenza teaches that transformation is not about escaping the old self, but reconditioning the body to trust the new one. You are doing exactly that. The fear that once flooded your nervous system no longer controls you, because your body has learned something profound. You can handle what you once tried to avoid. You can stay in the discomfort long enough to understand it. You can face uncertainty long enough to see what is real. The mind no longer panics at the first sign of doubt. It waits, observes, evaluates. It no longer reacts from memory. It responds from presence. And now you stand at the edge of something new. Not a new era of perfection, but a new era of ownership. You will still feel fear because fear is part of being human. But now you understand fear's language. You recognize its patterns. You know where it comes from. You know that the brain sometimes imagines shadows where there is only light, and you know exactly how to break the spell before it becomes a loop. This is the moment when you walk forward differently, with a mind trained to separate fact from fiction, with a nervous system that answers to clarity, not chaos, with an identity shaped not by past wounds, but by present consciousness. You step into life with the awareness that fear is not your enemy. It is your compass, your mirror, your opportunity for evolution. And as you move forward, remember this. The loop ended not because fear disappeared, but because you finally saw the truth. The power was never in the fear. The power was always in you.